Good nutrition is vital to successful dairy production. Donald Brown has advised milk producers on nutrition for many years.
Dairy cattle have been quite different from the beef side. They are really highly developed genetics, really highly evolved genetics that are driven to produce high volumes of milk, and they're always working on a metabolic knife edge all the time. So bad nutrition really just knocks them right off, and you result in a whole range of metabolic disorders with dairy cows, milk fevers, acetonemia, but poor feet, poor fertility, just inherent within the dairy cow, and it's basically nutrition related.
One of the biggest challenges in a dairy herd is getting the first calved heifer back in calf. What's your advice to farmers to get enough nutrition into her for her to go back in calf?
She's going to have a smaller appetite than the older cow, more mature cow, because she's still growing, and because 9 times out of 10 her milk quality is an awful lot higher than a young animal. Her energy requirement is actually very high, and it's very, very difficult to manage our requirements to our intake. So it's everything the farmer can do to assist that animal to eat as much as possible is the only way really to manage heifers. Competition for feed is one of the big things, competition for water. If you've got a lot of congestion round about feed troughs and water trough, the young heifer is shy to go in there or gets bullied out, so if it neither eats nor drinks enough, and that then impacts on its performance. So with that young heifer, really the best thing to do is to manage them in a separate group and feed them in a ration that is going to drive its intake, everything possible to increase its intake. If the farmer does anything to influence it or to reduce that intake, then he's run into a huge problem getting her to rebreed again.
What are the nutritional comparisons between using in-parlour feeders and out-of-parlour feeders?
When that concentrate goes in there in fairly large slugs, it reduces the pH in the rumen, and the starch digestion bacteria take over, and they can multiply very, very quickly in the rumen. You can get a starch digestion bacteria can double its population in about 2 hours. So you hit them with that big slug of feed at any time of the day at Milkins or whatever, you're going to get a rapid drop in rumen pH, a huge build-up in starch digesting bacteria, a die-off in fibre digesting bacteria, and it takes the animal probably about an hour of cud chewing before it can actually get that microbial population turned round again. And within a few hours of it getting that microbial population turned round again, you hit it with another slug and it just goes through the whole cycle again. So they really need to be fed little and often. Small amounts of concentrate fed frequently throughout the day, and that can be achieved through total mixed ration feeding, where all your concentrates and forages are mixed together into one feed, or it can be achieved through out-of-parlour feeding, where the animals may be getting fed concentrates 8–10 times a day.
And the out-of-parlour feeders have found favour at Barnet Hill.
It's been very beneficial in milk production as well because of the stress factor, and it's actually cheaper to work with 4 out-of-parlour feeders as to put the feeders into the milking parlour. So that was a big cost at the time. But no, I would say the cost is in the milk production and the cows being content. Yes.
Alan, what about the scientific side of it?
Out-of-parlour feeders, Robert says they get to get into those 4 times a day. Before they were getting fed, obviously getting milk twice a day, so they get fed twice a day. This means they're having to take on large quantities of concentrate in one feed. The rumen pH will drop as soon as they eat this concentrate, and the cow fights all day to get itself gathered back together and the pH to come back up. It then gets milked again, it gets another big feed of concentrate, and the exact same thing happens again, and the cow's constantly fighting with the pH of its rumen. Now that they're getting twice as many feeds but half the amount at a time, that they're not having to work so hard to keep this pH of the rumen under control. So from that point of view, the cow bound to be benefiting.
Critical to successful dairy management is the production of quality silage. So how important is it for farmers to have their silage accurately analysed?
It's really, there's no way you can actually properly feed dairy cows unless you've got some really accurate figures to go on. Everything you do is determined round about their appetite, and you really need to know how much concentrates you should be putting in with that quantity of silage to produce the perfect balance. Producing the perfect balance, it's like putting 2 and 2 together and making 5. If you get that balance right, then all of a sudden the health of the animal just takes over, and you don't need to drive production. The animals get sufficient genetic in there to get the production. All you're doing is producing a really healthy animal and letting it then do what it does best, produce milk.
How much variation is there between the analysis of the silage, say between cuts or within different areas of the clamp?
The quality of the silage you make is determined by two things: the stage of growth it was at when you cut it, and the weather. And not only the weather while you were making it, but the weather in the kind of 10 days to 2 weeks prior to it is going to determine the amount of sugar that's there to drive the fermentation that's going to preserve the silage. The stage of growth is going to determine how digestible the silage is, and that's what D value is. It's just digestibility. 60% D value silage means 40% of it comes out the animal undigested at the other side. 70% D value silage is like chalk and cheese. There's a huge difference between the two. You've really got to get these silages balanced to get that animal performing to its optimum health. You're really not looking to drive production in these animals. All you're trying to do is produce a healthy, stable conditions. And you could have a situation where you've got a very low 63, 64 D value silage, 10.2 ME. If you're trying to produce 25 litres from your base ration, that could take upwards to about 10 kilograms of concentrates to achieve that balance. Whereas if you had a 73, 74 D value silage, 11.5, 11.6 ME, you could get the same level of production with 5 kilos of concentrates. When you work out the difference in that, it's worth over 2 pence a litre. So getting that silage analysed, getting it properly balanced, and then using your analysis to try and improve in your silage making. There's a great saying, you can't improve what you don't measure. So unless you're analysing your silage on a regular basis, how are you going to know what you're going to change about your silage making process to make better silage?
So what would be, in summary, your advice to dairy farmers seeking optimum yield, fertility and longevity from his dairy animals?
To try and produce a really healthy animal and try and avoid as many of the metabolic problems as possible. 80% of metabolic problems in dairy cows have their origins in the 2 weeks before and the 2 weeks after calving. And that's when the diet is changing from a pre-calving diet to a post-calving diet. If you can manage the nutrition through that period, then in the main, the rest of the lactation is fairly plain sailing. So it's having to manage that nutrition to try and get that cow really performing. Big appetites is what drives the whole thing. And see, anything the farmer does that's going to reduce the animal's appetite is going to be leading to metabolic stress.
You'll have heard some of the farmers and vets featured in this dairy chapter referring to the funding available under the Animal Health Programme as part of the Land Management Contract. This programme funds individual farmers thousands of pounds over 5 years to enhance the health and welfare of the stock and, consequently, their farm business profitability. There's funding available for an Animal Health and Welfare Action Plan, performance monitoring and benchmarking, biosecurity, sampling, and forage analysis. So, to make the most of this grant-funded opportunity, contact your local vet today. So what advice should farmers expect if they want to keep disease out of their flocks and herds? Let's leave the last word to one of the country's leading research scientists.
Think before you make major moves in farming to think about what the consequences are of moving animals onto your farm, mixing unknown stock with your own home-reared stock, and essentially taking veterinary advice or farm advisor advice to make sure that the risks are minimised. The consequences of bringing disease onto your farm can be enormous, and I think people underestimate it. It's not easy to see disease. Disease can be subclinical. You may not be able to see any signs of it, but it is costing you money. It's also adversely affecting the welfare of farmed livestock, and I think that's something that Scottish farmers are very aware of, and we can do something about that. So perhaps think before you act in terms of particular movement of animals onto farms.
We hope that you found the information in this programme to be helpful and thought-provoking. Getting on top of the diseases and health issues featured can make a significant improvement to the profitability of your livestock business. Before you can prevent or control a health problem, however, it's important to understand it. Your vet can fully explain the details of particular diseases and health issues, in particular the causes. understanding the cause is a major step towards successful prevention. And there is no doubt that prevention is far better than cure.